Hello, I'm Robert, and you're welcome here in my biz little shop. On today's episode of What's on My Workbench, I've got some leather. This is the Vaqueta leather from Montana Leather in black, and it's 9 ounce in weight. And we're going to make a unique belt with this. It's for a repeat customer. You know what? Let's get over here on the workbench, and I'll lay out what we've got to get accomplished today. I appreciate you taking time to be with me in the shop today. Okay, to get started, I went ahead and I cut a 1.5 inch strip of leather off of that hide. Now, I've had some people ask me about this leather, how it is to work with as opposed to regular Vegtan leather. I can't tell the difference. It's that simple. So it glues up to another layer just as well. It finishes just as well. It's pretty much struck through. Maybe that's just the texture of the leather there, but it looks like maybe there's a slight line in the middle there. So I don't have to worry about dyeing the edges either. And so I went ahead and I cut a 1.5 inch strip of leather for there. Now, this belt is going to have cartridge loops on it, like this. Here's a little mock-up that I created out of some leather that I used last year when I made the first cartridge belt that I'd ever made. And I was trying to figure out how much leather I need to complete the task. And this was, I think, 38. This is a 41 mag cartridge here, not your typical revolver. And I've done a little bit of testing, and I find that I need 5/8 spacing between the rows on the belt side, and to create the loop I need 1 1/8 inches of leather for each one of these loops across there. So to figure out the distance we want to cover, it's going to be 12 inches. So I did a little bit of work here to figure out how many cartridges I'll be able to hold, which is 19. That will fit into 12 inches of leather on the belt, which is what the customer specified. And then in order to accomplish that, I need 23 inches of this 3 ounce leather here on the face. I don't know. I think maybe that helps, but the first time I had to do it, I was trying to figure out how to, get the distance. And I guess you could create it extra long and then try to trim it off. But to me, all that became important, trying to figure out the spacing on the belt and such. So let's set this aside for the time being. And on this belt, we need to cut this strap to length. And I've said before, a lot of people, they're trying to add like 8.5 inches or 9.5 inches. I find it easier to get the math done if you just add 10 inches to the length of the belt. So let me cut this to length. Okay, so here is my belt blank here to length. I added 10 inches to the length, and that accounts for 3.5 inches for the bend over and 6.5 inches past the hole used on the belt. So the next thing I need to do is to cut a strip of leather that will make up the cartridge strip. Now, on here, let's see if I mocked it up on 1.5 inches, just short of 1.5 inches. I figure I need to have, I want the top cartridge to be lined up pretty much with the top of the belt here. So, and then this is a pretty good size round. So it's going to be wider than the belt. Not a whole lot, but a little bit wider than the belt. And you could go to wider leather on the whole belt for that. But then with the cartridges on there, it becomes difficult to get that through your belt loops. And it's quite possible with the height that they'll have to put the belt through the jeans and then load the cartridges in there because of the length of the cartridge. There's not a whole lot I can do about the length of the cartridge, but I can work on keeping the belt so it'll work through the loops. So, with that said, I'm going to go with a 1.25 inch strip of leather. So I need to cut 1.25 inch strip of this same black leather. Okay, So here's my 1.25 inch strip of that same leather. And the next thing I need to do is I want to get it down to 3 ounces. 3 ounces is the weight of the leather that I've got that I made these loops out of. So I need to go over to the splitter, and I've got 2 tasks. One is I need to split down the bend over area of the belt to make that fit cleaner and not be quite so bulky there. And the other thing is I need to split this down to 3 ounces to make those loops. So here is the outer piece, and I'm about maybe a little over 3.5 ounces for my loops here. And then this is my other leather, and I stripped this fold over down to 5 ounces. So it'll be 5 plus the liner, which is about 3. So we'll be at 8 ounces on the fold over part of it here. I want to keep that fairly meaty because this is going to have quite a bit of weight on it when I'm finished. So the next thing I need to do, I'll set these cartridge loops here out of the way in my mock-up, and I need to lay this out where those cartridge loops are going to go on the back of it here. Let me measure my fold over here, and I just clip that in place. You might ask, why do you fold that over and clip that in place? I'm trying to take math out of this as much as possible. Now I'm able to measure from the fold here to find the center of the back. Let's go ahead and get that marked here. So this light pencil mark now signifies the center of the back. Everything will be centered off of here. My stitching pattern that's on here and my loops that will hold the cartridges is centered here. And the specification calls for 12 inches of loops. So I'm going to mark kind of lightly with a pencil here. If you remember to erase those, you won't have those show through your clear finish when we're done. So now we've got 12 inches start and finish. Beyond that, about 1/2 inch is going to be where the tab is on the outer ends of that. Make sure I've got that in the right place. So 6.5 here, and add the other 1/2 inch on the other end as well. Okay, now I know where my stitching pattern needs to start. It needs to start on this side here. And we need to leave enough room for it to end before the buckle. So let's measure and see what's going to look right there. So it looks like we're going to have about 10 inches of stitching. That gives me about 4 inches here on this end here where the buckle goes. So 10 inches of stitching then will be on both sides. Then I need to figure that out on the other side as well. And then I'll measure to make sure that it looks like I've left myself room, because I don't want to run into that with the holes on the buckle end. This one calls for 7 holes on the buckle end. Okay, probably hard for you to see, but I laid out, here's where my stitching ends, and then my holes, the wearer's hole is going to be here, and then there's 3 short of that. So I don't want to go past my 10 mark. This is going to have the, what I refer to as my Western belt stitching pattern on it between those areas. So the next thing I need to do is lay out and create those holes. We're starting here at the 10 inch. Now what I'm not going to do, I'm not going to actually put my line quite there, because I need to lay out the holes. You know what? Let's do that now. Okay, now that I know where that 10 inches of stitching is going to be, I'm going to now lay out my stitching pattern on here as well. Okay, let me see if this angle gets you a little bit better view of what I'm doing here. So my cartridge loop area ends here where this tape is set at 20. Ignore the fact it's 20. I'm just using this to lay out my stitching pattern now. So to lay that out, my first pattern is 1.5 inches long. So I'm going to go to here and put another light pencil mark. Okay. Then I've got a 1/2 inch gap where I put a little rivet here. And I'm going to go now to 15, mark to the 1/2 inch. Once again, another spot will go there. So here is then 3 inches from that, which is down here to the 11 mark. Nope, 11.5. It's wondering why it wasn't coming out. 11.5, a 1/2 inch gap, and then I need another 1.5 inches. So I'm actually going to go past my original mark by 1/2 inch over here. All right, now that I've got those marked, I'm going to use my wing divider here, and I just visually figure out where I want that. I've got 2 rows of stitching down the center, and this is where that gap's going to be. And all I do is put this fairly light mark in there. I don't know if you can see that. Really hard on this black for you to follow along. Okay, that's where my stitching's going to go. Let's go ahead and set up, and we'll put the holes in. Now, I don't know if you can see or not. Let me turn it here. You can see the little crease here. I am going to start here. This is where the cartridge loop ends. And it's easy to get these twisted a little bit, but I set it down on there, and it created these little dots. So you can see I'm lined up on my little crease line there. So I'll put it on there, tip it up, make sure it looks good, and then we'll create those holes. And I use, on the long one, I use 3 of these connecting, and on the short one, I do just 1.5. I think it'll make sense here in a second. Like that. Then I cross over here to my pencil mark to give myself the 1/2 inch gap. Try not to hit the camera. And when I say 3, then I just hook this here. Make sure it looks good. 2 and 3. And I'll do that all the way to the end here. Then I come back, you've seen me do this before, where I'll put the tines back in the holes here. So I stick the tines in those holes, push this up against there, come over to this next little crease line. I can tip it to make sure that I'm on the line cleanly. And you have to do that on each one of these sets, same way. The first time I did this, I created this belt, I just visually lined it up. And I think it looked pretty good, but this was a better way to line them up on there. And I think when you look at that, it seemed like it'd be easy to do, but since they're diamond shaped, it I guess for me, it just wasn't that easy to line it up without using some tools to make it look better and have it lined up better. So I'm going to do the same thing for these sets here. There's a long one and a short one, and then on the other end of the belt as well. And then I'll come back. Okay, so I've created all of the stitching holes that go in the center of this belt. And I wanted to point out something. So to me, when I'm doing a belt with any pattern, to me, the most important thing is to line up the back of the belt with whatever's going on. So that when you come around the front, if you line up the back as the center, when you come around the front, then both hips, that pattern should end the same, close to hips or wherever you're ending that pattern. It should be balanced. I guess balance is probably the best word. So when I come in here now to lay out my pattern for my loops, I'll start again in the center and work my way back out here. Then whatever spacing that I have created here on both ends of the loops will be balanced once again between these stitching patterns. So I hope that makes sense. To create the stitching on here, I will center, once again, I'll center it here and I create those holes and I lay out all of those holes first before I start stitching that in. Another thing that I do that I haven't pointed out before is that if my spots are only going to go through the top layer of the belt, I go ahead and I put those spots in now as a visual reminder of when I start to assemble that. If there's holes there, I know that those spots have to go on first. And the only reason why I put the spots on first is if the length of the spot, if it won't go through the whole belt, then it needs to just go through the front. I also do it on some to keep the back from becoming too busy. So I've got those holes there now, and that will be a visual reminder for me to put those spots in. Because yes, I've done that before where you get the belt finished and you realize you need to put the spots through the front part of it. Next thing I need to do is I need to install these stitching. But I'm glad I said that because I don't. The first thing I need to do is I need to go through here and I'm going to put a coat of resin on the front of this belt to get that sealed, because the stitching in the center is light gray. And when you put the resin on here, you'll pick up a little bit of that color and transfer it to the thread. So I want those threads to be nice and crisp. So I'm going to go ahead and seal the front of this belt with resin. And when that is dry, I'll come back and I'll do my stitching on here. So as you can see, I've got the coat of resin is dry and I'm installing this stitching here. This is an accent stitching. In other words, it's not holding anything together. The thread is Tiger Ritza light gray, and I'm using 2 John James needles here to install this stitching. And the way I complete this stitching, it allows me to move from one section of holes to the next. I do that on the back side of the leather strap here. And you'll see where the accents are going to go. Those will be fake turquoise accent. I've gone ahead here and I had intended on my previous belt, I did this stitching on the back, stitching this on the completed belt, but I've changed my mind. I'm going to put this on the front layer and then sew the 2 layers together. So the next thing I need to do is to go in and set out spots 5/8 of an inch apart which I did after I set my wing dividers and just walked it along after finding my center. And now I'm just going to use this square here and create the line to follow with my stitching chisels. This just makes kind of quick work, and I think somewhat accurate work on it as well. All right, so I've got those lines on there. The next thing I need to do is similar here on this. This is the strap that's going to make up the, the shell casing or shell holder. And I've set this to the 1.125". And I remember that since I have 19 shell casing holders or 19 holders together, that I have to start splitting on the top. In other words, I need an even number of lines for an odd number of holders. And I cut it slightly longer than I needed so that I can trim my end piece that will go on the belt here. So this last one will line up like that here, and then I want to trim it so that I end up stopping here short of the threads. So let me explain. One of my thoughts and ideas on this was that if I install this after the belt has been made, I'll have all of my stitching along the edges completed. But the stitching really, since it's applied with contact cement, you're not pulling that apart. So I've always said the stitching helps control stretch some, but more than anything, it's decorative. So I have to decide if, putting the stitches on first and then putting this on is better, or if doing it the other way around. And I think on this one, I'm going to do it the other way around. So do I want it to line up here, or do I want to actually line up at the top and have the round sticking up from there? I don't know. It's probably 6 one, half dozen the other. The projectile is pretty long, so I'm thinking that I may want to just line it up at the top. So if I'm going to do that, then where do I want my stitching holes to go? Obviously hooking it wouldn't do any good because you'd have string over the top of the belt. Or if you put this up at the top, then you'd be cutting it really close there. I don't like that either. So what I think I'm going to do is, and then I have to remember, I'm not going to do round over on the part of the belt that's here, from here to there, on this top inside. I'm going to leave that square to help catch the edge of that case and hold it in line with the top of the belt. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start with it down one. So I'm going to hook it on my thin piece. Let me just call it the shell casing billet, and hook it like that. And the other one will come close to the bottom. So my first stitching then on this needs to come, and this is all important for a specific reason, like this. I think you can see them there. Let me do it one more time. Okay, so this will be how my stitching goes. Could grab the heavier mallet. Right like that. Now this last one here, I do want it overlapped to stitch in here at the bottom. So I'll start here, and then this last one, stitch here will tie in that bottom. I think that makes sense. So now that I know where I want to start at the top, I'm going to use my wing divider again. And I'm going to set it to find the center of that mark. And now I'll just put a mark on each one of these, and this will be where my top stitching hole goes across this belt. On my marks, I'll put an imprint here. I'll move down to this spot here and create my holes. I'll do that all the way down the length of here. Then we'll come back. We'll be ready to, I'll trim this end here, and then we will get this stitched onto here as well. Be right back. All right, so I have all of my holes put in for my loops and all of my holes in the belt blank. I trimmed the end of this tab a 1/2 inch past there. You could stop here, but you know, I suppose if that ever tore out, that it really wouldn't matter that it was here, but I felt like I needed to have another row of stitching here just to give me a good secure ending point. So I used my 4-tine, lining up those holes so that my strap's in the right place, and then I'm just going to visually set my 6-tine here back about 1/8 of an inch from the edge, and I will drive that in now. There we go. That gives me my finish on that part of the billets, like that. And I'm going to do the same thing on this end here, and I'll just set this on here. Make sure I'm in a good spot. And drove through. Okay. We'll set up in the stitching pony and stitch this. And I'm going to use black thread here. I don't think it needs to be white to draw attention to it. We have the white here. These will have the turquoise spots. So I'm going to go ahead and line up here and start stitching this. And I'll show you here when I'm in the stitching pony with it. All right, just finishing up here. I think I've got about 30 or 35 minutes in sewing this by hand. So we're wrapping up here. I've got finished this loop, one more loop, and then tie down the flap. And since the belt is going to be lined afterwards, I can just finish up with a simple knot on the back side here. And I found it a little easier if I poke this through the back side here and then put it through both sides here of the front. And then snug that down, forming that loop. And then come back here. From the back here with the other needle. And once again, I kind of refer to it as kind of a leapfrog method of saddle stitching. I think there's quite a few people that do it this way, and this is how I did all of my belts to begin with. It's harder to keep the stitch as uniform, but it's going to be down here between these cartridges, so if one lays to the other side of the thread, I don't think it's going to be noticeable. Probably by the time we pull the leather into the form here of the loop, it would straighten out any errant stitches. So I thought I'd let you see here towards the end. So here are my loops on the front and my stitches on the back. All right, so while I've got you here, we'll go ahead and set the turquoise spots on the front. So with that placed in this little area here, I'll then use my setter on the back. It is a little bit domed to keep from flattening that out completely. 3 good wraps and it's set. So we're starting to get a good look at what it's going to be when it's finished. Next, I need to set up and contact adhesive the backing on here. And once the contact adhesive is dry but tacky, I will laminate these layers together. So I'll be back here when I'm ready to laminate these together after the second coat goes on and has a chance to dry. All right, so we're ready to laminate these together. I create a little bit of a fold here, or a bend where it's going to double back on itself. Okay, we're making progress here. I'll trim off the edges here and get them sanded true, and then we'll be ready to cut this belt to its finished length on both ends with my 1.5 inch round end punch. And then I'll cut my point here. First, I'm going to do it with the 1.5 inch. You know what? I can go straight to it. So this is a Laramie set on it. So it has, you have to cut the end of the belt narrower than the strap so that the metal tip can go on. And this is the easiest way I find to do it. It's like that. And then I'll finish off because this tail this needs to be cut back a little bit further on both of these tails of this punch to get that on the end. For right now, I'm just going to cut that off here. It'll make sense when I mount the hardware on here. Okay. Okay, so typically, and I'll do it on this one, but I always start at the tip with my stitching chisel so that my last stitch is going to be in the point, which is less important because you won't see the point here. So the point of this conversation, if we stay on point, is I'm actually going to start here, and I'm going to line it up on both sides so that as I go this way, my stitches line up with each other. And then I'll just come out here and stay inside of this area that the hardware will cover. And I've kind of made it a little more challenging because what I don't want to do is have a knot here. If I started at the tip and came down to here, I don't want to have a knot on the inside, and it's probably not that big a deal. You can do a back stitch there, but I'm actually going to start here and stitch all the way to the tip and all the way down this side to here. So I'm going to be working with extra long thread, and then this other side here, I'll just stitch from here down to the bend. I think that makes sense. My knots then will only show on the back side of where the buckle's at, where you don't see it. So let me get these holes in here. And all I do is line up here. You gotta make sure you have it tipped out, not straight up and down. If you straight up and down, it tends to maybe kind of want to wander a little bit. But if you keep it tipped the same, then your stitches on the back side will remain in a straight line like they are in the front. I've had people suggest cutting this groove, but there's a really good chance you're gonna miss that groove on the other side. So I'm not going to do that. I don't do that. All right, so I'm going to work my way through these, creating these holes. Probably kind of a boring part of the video. So when I get ready or when I'm into the stitching, I'll come back. We're making really good progress on this though. All right, so we're making a little bit of progress here. I've got all of the stitching completed here. The loops are finished, and I've just got this last little bit of stitching to do along the edge there. And I don't know why I was thinking the way I was. I just went from here to the tip. That'll hide the stitches under the metal there, and started here, and like I normally do down the other side, and now I'm working from this side down. And I think the belt's coming together nicely. I just have to finish this saddle stitch along here, and then I will do my round over on the edges with the Ron's tool. I'll probably use a number 3 on this because it's a pretty thick belt. Some would argue that a 4 would look better, but I like the look of a 3. So I'll get the edges done, burnished. I need to get a coat of Resin on the back of the belt and the edges of the belt, and then shoot, we'll be ready to mount hardware here and see how our finished project looks. I appreciate you taking time to follow along today here. I'll finish this up and I'll circle back around when we are ready to do the edge work on it and then the clear finish. All right, I'm using my Ron's number 3 edger here. We're making really good progress. I need to burnish the edges now. This leather from Montana Leather really gets a nice burnish. It does really well on that. And I will, I'm going to touch up the edge with some Pro Dye. Not that the black needs it, but I'm just going to catch that edge of brown so it's black. And I think it'll look better that way when you look at the edge. And I like to do it after the burnish and before the clear. It seems like I'm able to better control where that dye wicks to if I'm doing it in that order. All right, mounting this tip, that's the next and maybe one of the tougher steps is mounting this. It takes some trimming. One thing that I find helps is to drop this square on there so I can push that against it to make sure that it's square to the belt itself. And then I'll take my tool here and I'll mark on the leather where that comes to. Now I know how far that has to go. I check it again here, make sure that's square, and it is. And it's about the right depth. I'm going to have to do some trimming on this edge here as well. But that smaller English point gets us a long ways towards that working. The next thing I need to do is I need to abuse it a little bit here and get it thinned down so that it goes in this tip easier. This holds about 10 ounces of leather, and I've got about 13 here, so we've got to flatten this out some and then do the final trimming. I think it looks good. Next we need to make the adjustment holes here. Always mark in from both sides in case there's any variance in the width, which there shouldn't be. But I also find that if I've got two marks here, it's easier for me to center up the hole punch on those. I just make a slight imprint to make sure I'm centered on those before I poke them. I've had some people make comments about using an oblong punch to make these holes, And I can see how that would maybe make that leather lay a little bit different there. I'm just curious to know what other people use as well. I like this because it's really convenient for placing the holes as opposed to a punch, but maybe if I got used to the punch, I'd like that. But what do you guys think? Do you like the round or the oblong holes for that? Do our dry fit, make sure she fits okay. Oh, I think she looks nice. Here's with the fake turquoise spots and the loops. They'll be formed once I get the shells in them. Here's an example, but it's probably a little snug until I get it wet for them. I think it'll look really good. Let's turn the camera around here. Well, there you go. I think it came out really pretty. The fake turquoise spots with the light gray thread, I think really stand out well with this Laramie buckle set. And once we get the rounds in here, I'll get this all wet formed so that each of these loops are nice and tight looking, and I think it'll be really nice. I appreciate you taking time to follow along today on the video, and I hope you learned a couple things. I did. Appreciate you taking time to be here. Please like, share, and subscribe, but more importantly, I hope you have a great day.